Robert Dijkgraaf is directeur van het Amerikaanse Institute for Advanced Study. Ooit de thuisbasis van Albert Einstein. Dijkgraaf woont op het terrein van deze vrijplaats van de wetenschap. Hij neemt ons mee naar wetenschappers die hun leven wijden aan de wereld van morgen. Denkers, dromers, verkenners, zoekers. Hun kennis verspreidt zich over een wereldwijd netwerk. Als we al die kennis verbinden, wat gaat dat voor ons betekenen? Zijn wij dan het denkende deel van het universum? The mind of the universe?
We zijn dromers, verkenners, makers, scheppers, denkers, zoekers, veroveraars. Eigenschappen van de mens die we eerder in the mind of the universe voorbij zagen komen. Maar ons vermogen om onszelf en onze kennis met elkaar te verbinden is misschien wel de belangrijkste eigenschap van de mens. De mens is een verbinder. In deze laatste aflevering van The Mind of the Universe bezoek ik 3 vooraanstaande wetenschappers. Een kosmoloog, een chemicus en een wiskundige. Zij weten in wat voor stroomversnelling onze kennis is geraakt en wat dat betekent voor de wereld van morgen.
If one looks into the future and asks, are we necessarily the end of the line and the best thing will ever happen? I don't think there's much evidence that that's true.
Zijn wij misschien de scheppers van een nieuwe en intelligentere levensvorm dan wij zelf?
I see this as a natural evolution. I see it as a way in which we are harnessing other kinds of power. And I honestly expect that there are probably others in this universe who have already done this.
Is er nog een rol voor ons weggelegd? Of neemt deze nieuwe intelligentie onze plaats in?
We're living on such a special time, because this century is very special. It's the first when one species, namely the human species, can determine a planet's fate. And also the century when we can perhaps start a transition to a completely different form of intelligence based on electronics and machines, and perhaps spread beyond the Earth.
Martin Rees is een fantastisch sterrenkundige en kosmoloog die aan alle onderwerpen van het universum heeft gewerkt, van de oerknal tot het ontstaan van zwarte gaten. Martin Rees is ook lid van de Pauselijke Academie van Wetenschappen en daarom zijn we hier in het Vaticaan om met hem te spreken. Thank you, Martin, for your willingness to do this interview. We are a very special location. We are in the heart of the Vatican City. Why are we here?
Well, we're here in the Vatican because the Vatican has an Academy of Science, and the members are 70 or 80 scientists from all over the world, of all faiths and none. So it's a really global academy, and we have scientific discussions. But I think one useful thing we can do is address issues of social import, where if we can interest the authorities in the Vatican, it can make a difference.
Hoe lang hebben de religieuze autoriteiten de wetenschap buiten de deur gehouden? Maar nu wil ook de paus de laatste wetenschappelijke ontwikkelingen horen. Ontwikkelingen met verstrekkende gevolgen. Met krachtige telescopen zoeken we naar het ontstaan van het universum. Ontdekken we overal nieuwe planeten. Sturen we robots naar plaatsen waar we zelf nooit kunnen komen. Bouwen we machines die slimmer zijn dan onszelf. Overstijgt onze kennis onszelf en begint die een eigen leven te leiden? Wat zijn we aan het doen? Hebben we een bestemming voor ogen? So Martin, in view of all science and technology What is our human destination? What's the future we are headed for?
Well, of course, it's very hard, and I just have a thought which is stimulated by where we are speaking, with St. Peter's in the background.
Yes.
And that was built by people who thought Europe was their world. They thought the world had existed a few thousand years and might only exist for 1,000, but they built that immense edifice which still inspires us centuries later. And it's ironic that now, when we have this perception that we are part of this vaster world and universe which is around for far longer, our horizons are much shorter. We don't build things that will take many generations to finish, as they did in the past. And the reason for that is that change is far more rapid, and change is far less predictable. The builders of St. Peter's thought that the next generation would live in a rather similar way to them, whereas we know that our next generation will live in a very different world.
Yes.
So as our horizons have extended, so the rate of change has speeded up.
Yes.
And that makes it harder to foresee the future. But I think what we do know is that the stakes are getting very high, in that if we screw things up badly, then we are in a position to actually set back civilization even to the Stone Age.
Yes.
If things go wrong and if technology is misapplied by error or by design. And therefore we have a far greater responsibility collectively to ensure that that doesn't happen. But at the same time, our horizons are wide, and we can think of the immense possibilities of humans and generations of possible post-humans who could perhaps spread life and intelligence far beyond the Earth. Maybe not just through our solar system, because one thing we do know is that there's nowhere in our solar system which is as clement as even the South Pole or the top of Everest. But of course, if we think much further ahead, then we know that in the universe, more broadly, there could be other places where life could exist and where our remote descendants can spread. So I think it's important that we think ourselves as not the culmination of evolution, not even perhaps the halfway stage in the emergence of complexity and intelligence, but we are a critical stage.
How do you see this from the point of view of evolution? Is this another phase in evolution?
It's a different kind because we've evolved from simple life through Darwinian selection over 3.5 billion years. But of course for human beings, Darwinian selection has stopped anyway. But future evolution will be technological. It'll be through modifying the genome and cyborg technology when we plug into machines, etc. And so this will happen in a directed way on the technological timescale, and therefore much faster, because Darwinian selection takes about 1 million years for a species to form, evolve, and go extinct, whereas changes to humanity and the emergence of post-humans could take just centuries.
Evolutie, dat bijzondere krachtige principe dat de natuur vorm geeft. Atomen en moleculen die zich samenvoegen tot nieuwe structuren. Structuren worden organismen. En zij die zich het beste kunnen aanpassen, blijven bestaan en planten zich voort. Organismen vormen netwerken en daaruit een levende planeet. In essentie is het leven en alles wat daaruit voortgekomen is, chemie en evolutie.
Ik ben op weg naar George Whitesides. Whitesides is hoogleraar hier aan Harvard University en de meest invloedrijke scheikundige ter wereld. Hij is gefascineerd door de bouwstenen van de materie, moleculen, de allerkleinste elementen. En welke nieuwe, slimme materialen je daaruit kan bouwen. Hij is ook geïnteresseerd hoe we het leven kunnen verbeteren en hoe we misschien ook wel de oorsprong van het leven kunnen vinden.
The thing about chemistry is that's chemistry, that's chemistry. Everything you see is chemistry. So that if you really want something that has the characteristic that it's universal, it's molecules and how you construct reality based on atoms. Now, there is a little business of the mind,
Uh-huh.
and what happens in between matter and mind is a different story. But that's molecules, too.
But going to the matter at this moment or something. So what do we learn, in fact, that things are made out of little building blocks? What does that tell us?
It tells us about the enormous variety that one can get from a pretty limited set of things. Because the periodic table is a pretty substantial list, but most of them don't show up very much. I mean, the number of occasions during the day in which you see promethium or something like that is very small.
Yes.
On the other hand, if you just imagine the variety that comes out of carbon and hydrogen and nitrogen and oxygen, it's what we call life. And that's truly phenomenal. And so the idea of the almost infinite variability of forms of matter and function and use that you can get by taking a pretty simple collection of starting materials, I think is one of the most remarkable things that I know.
De natuur is een wonderlijk laboratorium. Bijna 4 miljard jaar heeft de natuur geëxperimenteerd. En het heeft ons en ons technologische brein gevormd. Maar de evolutie stopt niet bij ons. Wij zijn onderdeel van die evolutie. Net als onze technologie. So there's this great lab that makes all these products, which is called nature.
Right.
And evolution. So can you say something how does nature operate and how does technology operate? Where are the differences or perhaps similarities?
In a sense, there's a similarity because if you believe Darwin, and I'm a great admirer of Mr. Darwin, nature operates by the idea of fitness. Now, what does fitness mean? You get into wonderful arguments about what fitness means, but it basically ends up with the idea that whatever processes got us here rather than porpoises or snails or something of that kind. And part of the reason we got here is that we're able to invent things that do not otherwise exist to accomplish purposes, some good, some bad, which other creatures haven't been able to do so well. So what got us here was the ability of our particular evolutionary experiment to do something.
Us as human beings.
As human beings.
Yes.
And the interesting thing about that, of course, is that if you say that what counts is experimentation and new ideas and adaptability, we're probably not the only thing that's ever going to be able to do that. So there will be other kinds of adaptation and evolution. And so if one looks into the future and asks, are we necessarily the end of the line and the best thing will ever happen? I don't think there's much evidence that that's true.
How do you see, from your point of view, and I think as a chemist, the material world and life, and how are these two worlds interacting at this moment, and what will bring the future?
Well, that question is, I think, one of the more interesting questions that's around right now, because there is a fundamentally interesting issue there, which is there's matter and there's life, and are they different, or is life just matter? And I have a prejudice in this, which is a hypothesis, let's say. And that is we have matter like this, which is stationary. And then we have matter of a different sort, and the example I like is a flame, which is matter, but it's doing something, and it only really exists because it's doing something. It's generating energy, and you mix methane and air, and you let it burn, and you get a flame. What's life? And one argument is that life is a very complicated sort of flame. You mix glucose from breakfast, or in my case, caffeine, with air, and you burn it. And by a very complicated process, you end up with a behavior which is not giving off heat and light, but it's giving off Beethoven in this conversation that we're having.
Yes.
And is that all there is, or is there something else there that we don't understand? And I think that's the great question. Is there something, we say, emergent, something that is not anticipated by existing science that distinguishes life from everything else, or is it simply a marvelously balanced by some set of processes that we don't understand set of molecular processes?
I could imagine that, again, from the chemical point of view, you might be perhaps biased to think the latter, and you think that it's just a very complicated process.
Well, I don't know that just is the right word, because just is a way of being a little bit dismissive.
Yes. Yeah.
What to me is so interesting is the idea that if you can have static matter, you can have dynamic matter, you can have living matter, and you can have thinking matter, then this whole process leads you to the idea of how on earth and why on earth would you arrive at something that was dynamic in the sense of being alive, and even more so, being dynamic in thinking.
Intelligent matter.
Intelligent matter.
If you think in perhaps more kind of a grayscale, or you have various kind of gradations in which matter is alive or intelligent, might these questions be answered soon in terms of real objects appearing, perhaps produced in laboratories that are kind of exploring that intermediate area?
There are, I think, two questions there. One question is are there examples in which that line is already blurred?
Yes.
And I think there are many of them. And one that I think is worthwhile thinking about is simply a frozen egg, a human egg. There's no chemistry going on. It's doing absolutely nothing. There is nothing in that would suggest it's any different from a rock. But you warm it up, and all of a sudden it's able to do something different. And you see in a sense, the same thing at the thought perspective, because a human egg, when fertilized, isn't thinking. There's nothing to think with.
Yes.
And when the baby's born, it's not thinking much. I mean, there's thought going on, but it's probably certainly not self-aware.
Yes.
And then you end up with all of the semantic problems that you and I have in trying to understand what thinking is about. It's a continuum. Both of these are continua. So what that says to me is that you can go from something that is not alive to something that's alive, and from something that's not thinking to something that's thinking in a continuous way. And the thing about continua is that they usually go on.
Yes.
So there's...
We're not the end point of that curve.
We're not the end point in that curve. That's right. And so you say, isn't it dismissive to think that we're just a flame? And the answer is no, absolutely not, because what you want is more complicated flames.
Right.
And that gives me a great deal of optimism that whatever we are 1,000 years from now is not going to be what we are right now.
Eigenlijk zijn we baby's. Op de tijdschaal van het universum zijn we nog maar net geboren. En er valt nog oneindig veel te ontdekken en te ontwikkelen. We leggen onze opgedane kennis vast en delen dat met elkaar. We verbinden iedereen met iedereen en we verbinden onszelf met computers. We leren computers om informatie te zoeken. We leren computers leren. We leren computers denken. En uiteindelijk, ja, waar gaat dat uiteindelijk naartoe?
Ik ben hier in Boston aan de Charles River om Jennifer Chayes te spreken. En Jennifer Chayes is een bekend wiskundige die op een gegeven moment gevraagd werd door Microsoft om de onderzoeksafdeling van hen te gaan leiden. Dat doet ze hier in het centrum, het wereldcentrum van de technologie. Het bijzondere is, haar wetenschappelijke expertise is netwerken. En zij is dus een ideaal persoon om de verschillende elementen met elkaar te verbinden en ons uit te leggen wat technologie op dit moment doet, hoe alle verschillende vakgebieden bij elkaar komen en wat de toekomst is die die technologie ons gaat brengen. Hey Jennifer,
Hi,
good to see you.
Robert. How are you?
Very good.
Lovely to see you.
Wonderful that you want to join in this program.
It sounds like it's going to be a lot of fun.
Now you're typecast as the connector, so it's your task to connect all the strands in this series into one big knot.
That's a tall order.
I think you're the perfect person to do so.
We'll see. We'll see.
Great.
But it'll be fun.
Will be
in
fun.
any case.
Yes.
Okay.
I think one of the really exciting things is that with online courses, articles available on the archives, and this kind of thing, you can be a scientist anywhere, even in the developing world where you don't have very much, but you have enough connectivity for a cell phone, and you can tap into this. So I think it has allowed us as scientists to help spur the scientific endeavor in the developing world. I don't know how we would have done it otherwise. You can't build up libraries in sub-Saharan Africa. Now, obviously, if you're starving, you're not going to be doing science. But if you were not starving, you might still have been isolated from this kind of worldwide scientific endeavor, and now you're not.
Onze kennis neemt zo sterk toe dat we het zelf niet meer kunnen bijhouden. We ontwikkelen kunstmatig intelligente systemen die ons helpen een weg te vinden in die enorme hoeveelheid informatie die de wetenschap oplevert. Dat geeft zoveel nieuwe kennis dat we steeds krachtiger systemen kunnen bouwen. We kunnen niet meer zonder onze netwerken, zonder onze zelflerende computers, zonder onze technologie. Samen vormen mens en technologie een collectief, zelfstandig brein.
If you think about particularly this kind of knowledge element, the fact that knowledge is now so easily, you can easily connect to it. It's so easy to collaborate. It's easy for knowledge to spread. You think that changes just the way, our research and perhaps even our collective kind of brain works?
I personally do think it changes everything. I mean, I am someone who in my career I started out in math and physics, and I ventured into computer science, and then ventured into economics and some social sciences, and ventured into computational biology. There's no way that I could have done this without the world of knowledge, the universe of knowledge at my fingertips to learn about different things, to connect with different people. And also, I sometimes get my best ideas when I am hearing about different disciplines, and I get an intuition that I might be able to connect them to the lenses through which I see the world, through mathematics and physics and phase transitions in particular. And so for me, this knowledge, we are really accelerating with information technology, the building of this fabric of knowledge, and we're breaking down the silos which existed. And I think it's actually just begun. I think that machine learning and artificial intelligence are going to transform our individual lives because we will start to interact. Right now we have our phones, we have Siri and Cortana and the, different personal assistants, but I think it's going to become so much deeper than that. We will have beings that really understand us, that relate to us. And we will have companions for older people, which is going to become a big problem in the world. We will have companions for our children. And then machine learning will also transform healthcare. It will transform environmental science, which is incredibly important. So I think in all aspects of this, as we develop machine learning, we are going to be able to really push ahead in the basic sciences, the applied sciences, and the way in which we interact with the world.
So,
This is your office?
this is my office, yes. So, many of these were the books I bought when I didn't eat as a graduate student.
So this is part of your old life here.
Part of my old life. I ate potatoes and spaghetti, and I bought wonderful physics and math books.
I think one joke is that you recognize the mathematician because she's carrying a yellow book.
Yes.
So, who would have thought that my work from all those years ago would give me and give us insight.
You would be probably surprised to hear about that when you were buying the books, that
Yes.
machine learning was...
Yes, I didn't know anything about machine learning. I had taken one computer science class, a Fortran class as a freshman, and that was my formal training in computer science.
If you take the long view and you think of the billions of years of evolution of life, and even the hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution, and now we're in this phase where technology is, in some sense, happening, you see this as some kind of a continuation of what nature is doing?
I do see this as a continuation of what nature is doing. And in fact, if you look at all of human evolution so far, we started out as hunters and gatherers, and then we began to farm. And what did we do? Well, we harnessed other organisms for our own good, and we interfered with their genomes, not by going in there on a cellular level and interfering, or on a molecular level, but we bred certain plants and animals, and so I see this as a natural evolution. I see it as a way in which we are harnessing other kinds of power. And I honestly expect that there are probably others in this universe who have already done this.
So you say we're kind of domesticating technology.
We're domesticating technology. We are domesticating technology. It's our creation, but it is also something that we domesticate. And we have created species, honestly.
Yes.
And I think provided that science as it develops and technology as it develops is done in concert with ethics, then we will be fine. Okay, so I think it's very, very important that we have ethicists, philosophers, legal scholars, sociologists, anthropologists participating in the creation of this science and technology.
De industriële revolutie heeft de machine in ons leven gebracht. In 1802 gaf de hoogleraar Johann Beckmann het gebruik van al onze vindingen een naam: technologie. We zien technologie en natuur als twee gescheiden dingen. Maar als een vogelnest of een spinnenweb natuur is, waarom een huis of een computernetwerk dan niet?
From a cosmic perspective, do you see difference between what nature is doing and what we are doing?
Well, I think in a sense we're going to take over from nature, because if we think of what may happen, not in the next 50 years, but maybe in the next 200 or 300 years, then it may well be that humans turn into sort of cyborgs, or that the electronic machines take over completely, because obviously they don't have all the features of the human brain, but they have the advantage of speed compared to the human brain. And so it could be that the future will lie with electronic machines, not organic creatures like us. And I personally think, if you ask me my most likely scenario for the next 100 years, there will be a few people living on Mars. There'll be people who are real adventurers. They'll have to cope with a very hostile climate and very conditions.
Old-fashioned explorers.
Yes, right. But they're in an environment for which their bodies are ill-adapted.
Yes.
And I think they will use all the technology we then have to adapt to that new environment, whether that'll be by cyborg techniques, by downloading their brains into a machine or something like that. And I think it'll happen there because we're probably going to want to control, for ethical or prudential reasons, the adoption of these technologies here on Earth. My scenario would be that within a few hundred years there will be entities that we would call post-human, in that they will be very different from us, so they'll be new species. And if they are electronic and not organic, then of course they may not want to be on a planet at all. They may be happier under zero gravity somewhere else, and that'll be the future. And so if you then think in terms of the cosmic perspective of time, when there are millions of centuries ahead, then the way things will look is that we had 45 million centuries, and then for a few tens or hundreds of centuries, organic civilization evolved, developed technology, and then it was taken over by machines, and they have billions of years, millions of centuries ahead. So no astronomer could really believe that we humans are the culmination of evolution.
So it continues.
It continues, and we've no idea what's going to happen. I mean, if we think of what might happen on the Earth, then of course, well, the pessimistic outcome is we wipe ourselves out. But the more optimistic scenario is that development continues. But if development continues beyond humans like us, it won't be Darwinian selection. It will be controlled technology-driven evolution by future developments in gene editing and also cyborgs and artificial intelligence.
So you feel this is kind of, in some sense, a phase transition. This is a radical change in what science will be doing.
This century is special for a number of reasons. It's the first when we could create species quite different from any we now exist. It's the first when maybe artificial intelligence, electronic intelligence, may start to compete with the level of intelligence in the hardware in our skulls. And it's also, of course, the century when, for the first time, life can spread from the Earth to other places in the solar system. So this century is very special.
Herscheppen we onszelf of scheppen we een nieuwe levensvorm? We leven in een bijzonder tijdperk. Niet voor niets hebben we dit tijdperk het Anthropoceen genoemd. Het tijdperk van de mens. Maar maken we zelf de keuzes of laten we ons leiden door onze technologie? Hebben we een richting voor ogen?
If you're speculating, machines and technology are becoming more and more important. In the end, will it be about us, the story, or are we just kind of an intermediate phase that kind of passes the torch to perhaps a smart machine or something else?
Well, no, there is the argument, and I think you may have heard about this from Martin Rees, that we're just a little glimpse in between a period in which you don't have sentience on the one hand, and then you have the real thing, which lasts for a very long time and is based in silicon or it does something else. I don't think it's easy to see the answer to that, but it certainly is true that you can understand that there are things that the internet can do that we can never do. Because I've spent a lifetime learning stuff, a very brief lifetime learning stuff. I die, it's gone. But that won't happen with other forms of memory and intelligence. They will be there forever.
It looks almost like the planet is coming alive and becoming an intelligent by itself.
Yes. Why not? Why not have a planetary intelligence that consisted of everything? One of the more interesting technological things that's come along in the last period of time has been the ability to read signals from the brain and use those to cause intentional motions, to run a robotic arm or something like that. It's pretty primitive at this point. But what it...
Connecting our mind to, so to say, the mind of the robot.
The mind of the robot.
Yes.
And it's at the level not of thought, but at the level of action. I mean, it's mechanics. But it's a step. And it's a really interesting step to a world in which you don't have to have physical connections to have things happen. Robots were developed, of course, originally to replace people in tasks that were not doable or difficult or unpleasant. And that's worked really very well. And there are a series of what are machines which have the unpleasant characteristic that if you happen to be standing too close to one of them, when it swings its arm, it simply cuts you in half and doesn't notice. So one of the things that's beginning to happen now is the development of what's known in the trade as collaborative robotics. Mm-hmm. It's a very important kind of distinction because with cooperative robotics, one can imagine then the step in which, on the one hand, we already have us thinking together with machines, computers that think all the time. We're very happy with that.
Yes.
And if we can now add to this something in which we interact with machines, and maybe even machines that look like us, although I don't think that's necessary as a part of this, then you fuse the two together, you know, the corporeal self and the information thinking self in ways that you can't tell the difference. Then all of a sudden we've done something which is really remarkable, which is, depending upon your point of view, creating a living or thinking peer competitor or cooperative species.
Wij maken technologie en de technologie maakt ons. We kunnen niet meer zonder elkaar. De ontwikkeling van onze technologie lijkt een autonoom proces te worden. Een zelfstandig, evolutionair proces. Een onomkeerbaar proces. Zonder weg terug. If you think about this as a force, is it kind of unstoppable? Is it somehow an autonomous development?
I think it is definitely unstoppable. There is a driving force, I believe, in human beings to connect with each other. Mm-hmm. And that force is leading us towards this transition. I don't think it's stoppable in any way. No one, you know this, no one is going to stop you from trying to learn more about particle physics, or for me, trying to learn more. It's not going to happen. And on so many different levels, on emotional levels, on intellectual levels, on levels of survival, we are driven to connect.
So the title of this series is The Mind of the Universe. And the idea is really that, in some sense, this connectivity is creating a mind that's kind of, it's at least a global mind or something. You see that kind of happening, that our individual being becomes much more part of a global ensemble?
Yes, I believe that we are part of this global ensemble. I see, I start to work, I come up with a theory of phase transitions for deep learning. And before I know it, there are people in other parts of the world that I thought were disconnected. I thought their research was on something different. And they find the paper on the archives, and they hear a talk, and all of a sudden we're connected. And it happens so much more rapidly over, obviously, world scale geographical distances, but also intellectual distances are shrinking. We are able to connect across what previously were intellectual divides. So it's world scale, but also it's our knowledge is becoming integrated at an incredible rate.
We zijn onderweg naar een andere mensvorm. En we weten maar van één planeet zeker dat er intelligent leven is. Onze aarde, waar kennis groeit en technologie zich ontwikkelt. Laten we dat koesteren. Martin Rees heeft veel boeken over sterrenkunde op zijn naam staan. Maar één boek springt eruit. Onze laatste eeuw. Een boek over de mogelijkheid dat de mensheid het einde van deze eeuw niet haalt. Een boek dat ons uitdaagt om voorzichtig te zijn met onze kennis, onze technologie, onze intelligentie en onze planeet.
I think we're at a stage where we do have to think globally in a deeper sense than we have in the past, because we know that we are interconnected, not just by technology of the internet, just-in-time delivery and all that sort of thing, but also because we are changing the planet's environment, we're changing the climate, we're modifying the biosphere and perhaps leading to mass extinctions if we're not careful. So we do need to think globally, and this is the first era where that's been essential. And we are also in the first era where we can actually change human beings themselves, because human nature has not changed since tens of thousands of years ago, perhaps, whereas now we know that we can change the human brain and change human physique and mentality in a way we could never before. So we are far more empowered than before, and we therefore have far more responsibility and far more exciting potentials.
I see that there will be an integration of human knowledge and the human mind with these, what I view as enhancements of the human mind. I am not someone who is worried about the machines taking over. I know a lot of very good technologists are. You know, you might have worried, I don't know, in the time of the first printing presses, that if the masses get this knowledge from books, well, first it was just the wealthy people who got the knowledge, and then over time, the masses, that there would be a restructuring of society, and indeed there was. But that was because there was so much more value that we could actually improve the lot of more of society. And my hope is that as we integrate humans with computers and with technology as enhancements of ourselves, that again, there will be a lot of value. You know, we still have half the population on this earth which does not live as well as the developed world. And so we could really use value creation in this world to improve the lot of those people.
I think as a species, we have tended to get better. And life is not as miserable. I spend very little time worrying about whether I'm going to be set upon by robbers, whether I'm going to make it past my 30th birthday. You know, these kinds of things are not a problem.
It was not that long ago
It
that
wasn't
people
that
were worried
long
about
ago
it,
that
yes.
it's 100 years ago.
Yeah.
All of this was unknown. Children died of we regard perfectly preventable disease. What's happened a little bit is that it's the genie out of the bottle problem. We've released the internet. We have nuclear weapons. We have the ability to do things which we use for good, but which, if we're dumb, we will use the wrong way. And so the question is a little bit, are we smart enough to keep the car on the right side of the road, or do we insist on driving in the wrong way?
Thank you for sharing with us.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm so happy I flew over here to have this conversation. Thank you very much. Yes. Having this all the time. Ken uzelf, stond er boven de tempel van de Griekse oppergod Apollo. Kennen we onszelf goed genoeg om te weten welke weg we moeten kiezen? Kunnen we het spoor van oorlog en haat achter ons laten? Kunnen we onze intelligentie en kennis inzetten om onszelf te verbeteren, om het leven verder te helpen, om het universum te verkennen en te doorgronden? Alleen dan zijn wij echt the mind of the universe.
Ich hoffe, dass Ihnen das Video gefallen hat. Klicken Sie hier, um das empfohlene Video anzusehen. Bitte abonnieren Sie unseren Kanal, um Updates über VPRO-Doc zu erhalten.